Hello, and thanks so much for spending part of your weekend with us here on Spectrum News 1. I'm Stef Manisero. Throughout this pandemic, our health has been top of mind, but a trend towards healthier living was underway well before COVID. New gym concepts were opening up all over the nation. Workout equipment sales were booming. Restaurants were adding healthy options to their menus. New diets were popping up all over the place, and that list goes on. And now, the healthy living mindset is seeping into the alcohol industry. Non-alcoholic or NA beer is becoming more and more popular as more people embrace this wellness-focused mindset. According to Nielsen, NA beer sales were up 39% in 2019 and set to finish 2020 up 38% at $184 million. Part of the industry's growth is thanks to big-name brewers increasing their NA beer offerings from companies like Heineken, Guinness, and Budweiser. All products you may have seen advertised heavily throughout dry January. But NA beers are also taking on a new life among craft brewers, namely Athletic Brewing. The company only makes NA beer, and it's becoming more well-known thanks to big-name investors, including Texans Lance Armstrong and, former Texan J.J. Watt. It's not just beer. Over the last year, there has been a boom in NA spirits as well, including zero-proof tequila, gin, and whiskey. Makers skip the distilling process and instead blend botanicals to replicate the flavor of each liquor. Ritual Beverage Company is one of the leaders in the industry. One of its co-founders says demand for its NA products have been off the charts, saying sales grew 93% between last February and April alone. The supply is tapping into an increased demand. According to Forbes, the data report shows consumers mention the term non-alcoholic beverage 81% more than they did a year ago. On Google Trends, searches for benefits of quitting drinking have gone up 70% in the last 5 years. So what does all this mean? Well, some people say it's the start of what they are calling the sober curious movement. Whether people are not drinking at all or simply drinking more mindfully, there appears to be more people questioning their relationship with alcohol than ever before. And experts predict this is just the start. They say over the next decade, not drinking is going to become more and more normalized. Instead of hearing that someone doesn't drink and asking why, they want people to flip the narrative and instead ask why it is you do drink.
We got blue leaf flower, Mexican lime, guava, sea salt, and charred oak. Serving a drink is a great way to start a conversation and to mark celebration.
Both are in order for Chris Marshall. We'll get to the conversation a bit later, but let's start with the celebration. For Chris, this month marks 14 years sober. That drink we just made is actually a mocktail.
In addition to just kind of the health problems that it was causing, I was also having a lot of social consequences. All my friends were kind of, drifting away from me, and I was feeling more anxious, and I really wasn't enjoying life.
Simply put,
alcohol was just not serving me.
And he's not alone. The CDC estimates 37 million U.S. adults, that's 1 in every 6, binge drink about once a week, consuming an average of 7 drinks per binge.
I think that there's a lot of problem drinkers out there, yes. I think that are not identified as alcoholics.
Interventionist and therapist R.J. Garcia says excessive alcohol consumption has become normalized in U.S. culture.
They've become accustomed to, it's okay for me to have 6 beers a night. And then when it goes to 12 beers a night, it's not that bad, because it's just beer. And then all of a sudden I can see it progressing into their 30s and 40s. And by the time they're 40, 45, and 50, they're not only a problem drinker, they're alcoholic.
For Chris, year 1 of sobriety was the hardest, partly because it was tough to find options to socialize that didn't involve drinking. But what he did find was a community to support him. And that, he says, was the difference maker.
So I really early on in my sobriety understood that connection was such a big part of this.
And he wanted to offer that connection to others exploring sobriety. So he opened Sans Bar, the first sober bar in Texas.
It was an answer to the question of where do you go when you're not drinking.
The bar only serves non-alcoholic drinks, including non-alcoholic tequila, gin, whiskey, wine, and beer. But his work here behind the bar is bigger than mixing mocktails.
A lot of people just want to talk. They just want to be heard. This is a community of people who lean on each other, who count on each other for support, who count on each other to be there in those hard moments.
Hard moments made easier thanks to this one-word reminder.
Mercy is what I grant myself and what I also grant others.
Which brings us back to that conversation.
And I'm by no means a prohibitionist, but I do want people to challenge their relationship with alcohol and question just how are they using it.
A challenge, he says, sans alcohol or not, can serve us all. And to talk more about this, I do want to welcome in Ruby Warrington, the author of a book called Sober Curious and a second book, Sober Curious Reset. Ruby, thanks so much for coming on. First, I do want you to tell us, for people who aren't familiar with your work, what is the Sober Curious movement?
So I coined the term sober curious about 5 or 6 years ago to describe my own evolving relationship with alcohol, which is that I was increasingly aware that alcohol was having a negative impact on my overall well-being. And yet I didn't see my drinking as problematic enough that I needed like an organization like AA. I didn't identify as an alcoholic. And yet I was very curious about what life would be like without alcohol. And it was only when I considered removing alcohol that I realized what a huge lifestyle shift that would mean for me as a kind of normal social drinker. And so, yeah, I coined this term sober curious to describe the process really of just kind of questioning my relationship to alcohol, but also how we use alcohol collectively and the role that it plays in society. And once I started allowing myself to ask those questions and to actually begin removing it from my life, I realized that, alcohol actually, many of us use it without really thinking about the overall impact. And it actually can have a really negative role in our lives if we don't address it.
And for people who are kind of exploring that relationship with alcohol and wondering where they stand, how does it impact or affect them negatively, what steps do you encourage them to take right off the bat to kind of get started exploring?
Well, we're just coming into March. Some people might have already heard about the Dry January initiative. There's also Sober September, which is growing in popularity. And these sort of month-long invitations to take a break from drinking can be a really helpful first step for anyone who wants to ask that big question. What would my life be like without alcohol? Perhaps they've been asking themselves privately for a while, but felt it wasn't something they could talk about. But you don't have to wait for one of these kind of like socially sanctioned reasons to take a break. So my first piece of advice would be commit to a time period of not drinking and see what comes up for you. It might be surprisingly challenging, in which case the questions are like, well, maybe I'm more attached to alcohol than I even thought I was. Why is it so difficult for me not to engage in the drinking culture? But embrace all of these questions as offering positive intel for you about changes you might want to make to your drinking going forward.
Yeah, you know, I feel like your term, Sober Curious, was the first of its kind, and it really helped so many people just simply putting a word to the emotion that so many people are feeling, and it kind of tied all together with the explosion of the non-alcoholic beverage industry. How helpful do you think it was for people who were exploring it to just simply put a term to it?
I think it's been huge. I mean, yes, people have been saying, wow, this new sober curious movement. But I actually think the fact that this term has been so widely embraced all around the world now shows that a lot of people were already sober curious. They just didn't have the language for it, meaning people were already questioning, why do I drink alcohol when it sometimes makes me feel terrible? Do I drink too much? Why is there so much pressure to drink sometimes? These kinds of questions, which have been very stigmatized and very much associated with alcoholism, 12-step recovery, and not everybody sees that as their path. So I think a lot of people have been questioning our drinking. I think the pandemic has really shone a light on our drinking habits as well, in not such a forgiving way sometimes. And so people are even more so questioning now, or even more sober curious, if anything. And so I think having that language, which is designed to be very non-judgmental, there's no right or wrong, it's just about asking those questions, I think has been really helpful for people.
And you have a second book now, Sober, Curious, Reset. Tell us about that one and how it's a little different from the original.
So the original book kind of lays out the whole ethos and philosophy of what it means to be sober curious and has a lot of my own experience of being sober curious. And then the second book, which is a follow-up, guides people through 100 days of not drinking. So for each day of content, there's a different question for you to consider with a little bit of intel on that, and then a different exercise for you to engage in to apply it to your life. And taking that really intentional, considered daily approach to a break from booze, say 30 days, 100 days in this case, I think can really help people get down to that deep-seated why. Why am I drinking the way I do? What role does it play in my life? Is it actually serving me? Is it something I want to be engaging with? We never really ask that why. Yeah. You know, as adults in our society, it's just expected that we will drink alcohol until it becomes a problem. But this is an opportunity to stop it becoming a problem in the first place, so that you really are one who's in control of your drinking. Yeah.
A lot of tough questions for so many people. Ruby, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.